Of all the series I've enjoyed watching on YouTube, one of the most criminally underrated has to be Wonders of the World Wide Web by the folks behind the channel Squirrel Monkey. The premise is to take modern apps and websites and reimagine them as retro computer programs from the 80s and 90s. This series is pretty funny, and it's very clear that the people behind it take a lot of time to focus on production quality, or lack thereof, minor details, and planting Easter eggs, which is why I'd highly recommend you guys check it out if you haven't already. Still, the videos aren't without their faults, and one that's really bugged me is with the video Snapchat in the 90s, where the image sharing platform is recreated as a Windows 95 application and website. My issue? Snapchat could have totally existed in the 80s, though I figure rather than trying to make my own video ripping off their format, I'll give an actual demonstration on my own equipment from the time period. Now, to recreate Snapchat on an 80s computer, we're gonna have to break down its functionality into three parts: taking a picture, editing the picture, and sending that picture to someone else. Now, while no computer that I know of from the 80s can handle all three of those out of the box, I do know that with a few hardware add-ons and a bit of extra software, the Apple II GS is more than capable of all three tasks. The first step, of course, is to take the picture, and, unsurprisingly, the GS doesn't have a camera natively installed on it, but we're in luck. A company called Digital Vision introduced the computerized GS Video Digitizer card. After installing it into one of the GS's expansion slots, the computer can take input from a VHS, camcorder, or any other composite video source. The one catch is, since the computer isn't fast enough to take a picture with each frame, it reads the image across in multiple frames, consequently requiring the image to stay still for at least 6 seconds, or else suffer from rolling shutter distortion. After grabbing the image from the camera, it would be simplified by the scanning software, so that it could be displayed with the GS's graphics hardware. Now, unfortunately, I haven't been able to get my hands on a computerized digitizer for the Apple II GS, but that doesn't mean I can't still load up my own custom pictures onto it just to keep this video a bit more interesting. It's a fairly in-depth process that I promise I'll get into in the future, but for now, take a look at the quality of the GS's image reproduction. This is at a resolution of 320 by 200, with only 16 colors, picked from a total of about 4,000, on the screen at any time. The more colorful the image is, the more dithering artifacts that begin to appear from trying to stretch that 16 color palette, but images with less colors, or just a lot of one specific color like this green leaf, can turn out pretty well, since all the colors are closer together. Alright, so we've completed step 1, capture a photo, but we still have to be able to edit the photo before sending it off. The image capture software does have a few settings to mess with, like scaling the image and tweaking the colors, but for the most part editing is going to have to take place in a separate program. In this case, Paintworks Plus, which can open files generated by the scanning software. Paintworks offers quite a bit of functionality for editing snaps. For example, you can apply a filter by changing the palette of an image. You can also draw and add a caption, but the colors will be limited to the palette of the image you took. If not all the spots in the palette are taken though, you can get away with adding in another color to draw with. Finally, we need to send the image by hooking the GS up to the phone line through a modem. We just load up AppleWorks by Claris, open a terminal document, dial the recipient on the phone, tell them to open up the software and receive the file, and start the transfer. Now, while the latest modems can achieve 56K baud, and the GS itself has an upper limit of 19,200 baud, the modem I'm using here, an Apple Personal modem from 1987, can only transmit at 1200 baud, which for a 32KB photo file means that the transfer will take around 5 minutes. Still, after the transfer is done, the recipient can open the file in Paintworks to view, and the best part is, the image won't actually delete after 10 seconds. In fact, if you want, you could store up to 25 photos on a single 800K disk. The example I just showed only demonstrated sending a single picture, but to an extent, Snapchat on the GS would even be able to handle video. Paintworks Plus has a compression feature, which allows for a sequence of images to be displayed one after another and create a very simplistic animation. I took the liberty of adding in 20 frames of this GIF and... dang it! Alright, moving over to an emulator, I added in the frames of this GIF and watched them be animated. The strange coloring you're seeing though is because the palettes for each image don't match up, leading to each frame having the wrong color as it's drawn in. I tried again in grayscale where each palette is the same and managed to get a pretty convincing video that wouldn't be able to fit on a floppy disk, and even if it was on a GS, would take hours to transfer. Not to mention, the digitizer wouldn't even be able to capture this video. Since every frame takes 6 seconds to scan in, the only way a video could be loaded into the computer is if it was a time-lapse, or stop motion. Snapchat could have totally existed in the 80s, and if you excuse the latency when taking a picture, tiny disk space, low photo quality, limited editing tools, excessive disk swapping, and slow transfer speed, I'd say this implementation is pretty spot on. To my knowledge, no program combining all these functions has ever been written for the GS, but I could easily see image capture, editing, and transfer all being rolled into one Snapchat client for the computer. I can't imagine sending pictures digitally would have been very popular in the 80s given the amount of hardware that would need to be installed to do so, along with the fact that it could easily take 15 minutes from taking a photo to your friend seeing it. But hey, it's technically possible, and probably happened at least once somewhere along the line. Anyways, there you have it. Not only could Snapchat have existed in the 90s, but technically speaking, the hardware and software were both there for digitally sending photos to have existed in the 80s. Tune in next time where we take a look at how Snapchat could have existed in the 1970s.